Hello, and welcome to the 2022 Ohioana Book Festival. I'm Laura Bickle, and pleased to welcome you to the Explore New Worlds panel. We'd like to thank our festival sponsors and partners, all of whom you can find listed on the Ohioana website. And thanks to our official bookseller, the Book Loft for German Village. You can get copies of all the books featured at the festival by going online to bookloft.com. And I'm now pleased to welcome our authors, Sarah Ann Carter, Bryan Prosek, and Sam Subity. Sarah Ann Carter, author of Orphan Wish Island, is a lover of books. She's an avid reader and is a book review blogger. Writing stories since she was little, she is constantly thinking of ideas that could be used as a plot for a novel. She's a journalist by trade and has written numerous newspaper articles. She has also worked in the public relations and marketing field. She grew up as an Air Force brat and has lived in many states and countries. Currently residing in Ohio, she spends her time enjoying her family, reading, and writing. She is a lover of travel and cats. You can visit her at her website at sarahanncarter.com. Bryan Prosek, author of A Measure of Serenity, is also here with us tonight. Bryan Prosek is a young adult writer and business attorney. He focuses his writing on science fiction and dystopian universes. Along with his debut novel, The Brighter the Stars, and his latest novel, A Measure of Serenity, he has published books and articles in legal trade journals and magazines. When he isn't writing or practicing law, you can probably find him watching science fiction movies or television shows. He loves the big screen and the small screen. There's a good chance that he'll be watching one of the numerous Star Trek movies or series, but he could be watching anything from Guardians of the Galaxy to The Conjuring. You can find out more about Bryan at his website, bryanprosek.com, taking you to new worlds. Sam Subity is the author of The Last Shadow Warrior. He loves writing stories that explore the magic and wonder of being a kid, and is thrilled to share his writing with readers everywhere, with the young in age and the young at heart. When he's not writing, you might find him running the trails of Northern California, where the endless winding miles past fog and ocean inspire stories of adventure and mystery. Or he might be mowing his lawn, because that's what adults sometimes have to do. But in either case, Sam is very likely imagining himself fighting mythical creatures or at the prow of a dragon ship, feeling the wind and sea spray on his face. Alongside his own Viking queeness, you too may be inspired to another place where, for a little while, you can exchange the ordinary for the extraordinary. His website is samsubity.com. So, thank you all for being here tonight, and let's dive in. Please tell us a bit about your current book and what inspired it. I'll pick someone at random to go first. Let's start with Bryan.
So my book, as Laura mentions, A Measure of Serenity. It's a young adult science fiction dystopia, more dystopian than sci-fi. It takes place here on Earth, and it's a parallel reality book, dual universe. And the protagonist is a young girl, 18-year-old girl, Serenity, who's neurodivergent times 10. So she's very intelligent and sees and remembers and hears things that no one else would, but she's also socially awkward, and she gets thrust into this other universe where she ends up having to kind of take on this leadership role, and she develops and grows throughout the story. But kind of what led me to want to write this is, one, I love, along with in the science fiction realm, I love parallel universe type stories, whether it's books, movies, TV shows, and so anything like that. So I wanted to do a book like that, but kind of a little bit, try to obviously change it up, something novel. And I also had never written with a female protagonist. So I came up with Serenity. I wanted to give her some type of ability, but not a superpower. So it's a mental kind of a mental superpower, I guess you could say, throughout the story. So that combination of different ideas and what I wanted to write kind of culminated into the Measure of Serenity.
Very nice. Sarah Ann, you want to tell us about your book?
Sure. Arkham Wish Island is my third novel. It's a young adult realistic fantasy novel. I was inspired to write it one night when I was taking my daughter to dance down one of our downtown streets. They have these old street lamps that are like this green base and then this frosted lamp. And while I was driving, they all turned on at once. And the phrase, "there used to be more magic," came to mind. And so as I explored that, I came up with a girl named Miriam, who was orphaned at the age of 8 when her parents die in a car accident. She's living with her grandmother, and on her 12th birthday, the streetlights flicker, the power goes out, and she sees writing on the attic door in her room. And when she opens the door, there's a tropical island where she can make a wish and hear a message from her parents. So she's able to return every year. And if she does, at the very end of the 6 years, she'll hear what her parents wished for her. So the book travels with her through all the lessons she learns through those 6 years.
Very cool. Sam, would you like to tell us about your book?
Absolutely. So The Last Shadow Warrior is my debut novel from Scholastic, and it's about a 12-year-old girl who's a monster hunter, and it's based on, so I was a medieval studies major back in college, as I read Beowulf back then, and about 10 years ago, I came across Percy Jackson from Rick Riordan, and I saw he had taken these old stories, the Greek myths, and updated them for modern kids. And so I wanted to do the same thing with Beowulf because I love Beowulf, but it's such a kind of old, crusty book that kids just can't get through it. So I wanted to update that. And that's what I did in Last Shadow Warrior. So Abby Beckett, who's my 12-year-old middle grade protagonist, is the kind of great granddaughter of Beowulf. And she's secretly a monster hunter, and she goes to this new school called Vale Hall. And she finds out it's full of these monsters from Norse mythology. So it's kind of a lot of stuff wrapped up in there, and monster fighting and magic. And so it's for kids from about age 8 to 12 or so. So that's my debut book.
Awesome. Sounds like a great collection of books here. One of the things I'm really curious about is how you went about building the worlds for your stories. What's your favorite part of world building, and what's your least favorite part? Anybody can just jump in.
So I would say just the research part, because so mine is loosely, well, it is based on Norse mythology and Beowulf. So doing all that kind of research, I read all these stories about Vikings and Norse mythology, and just being able to dig into that and then put spins on it. So I took like Jormungandr, who's the sea creature from Norse mythology that he's so big he wraps around the entire world. And so I took that and I put him in the school swimming pool, and he's like a monster that they had to fight at one point. So just kind of making this new twist on old myths. It was really just fun to do. And so I when I was a kid, I just did not like doing research at all. And it's funny because now that's like my favorite part of writing. So kind of full 180 there. But that's where my world started, with real stuff that I just updated.
Very cool. I love the image of the monster in the swimming pool.
And he plays ping pong too, so that was fun also.
Oh, he plays ping pong. Wow.
Yeah. Middle grade, you can do stuff like that. It's fun.
I like that.
Very
too.
cool.
Yeah. So do you want me to go next?
Sure.
So yeah, that's a great question. I thought about this before. You know, what do I like and dislike about creating it, and then how I created this universe. But to me, the positive and negative of writing science fiction or fantasy, the positive is you can create your own world. You can make it whatever you want to make it, and so you have no reality boundaries. But then on the flip side, once you create that world, you build your own boundaries. So as you move forward through your book, or if you write a sequel or a trilogy, you have to make sure you always go back and stay within the world that you built. So you don't want to, create something let your characters do something down the line that wasn't allowed, early in the book. If a certain type of magic, you couldn't do earlier, and then all of a sudden, well, I need to make this happen. So you use that. So you can do whatever you want, but you still have to stay within the world you create. As far as this book, as I mentioned, I guess I should say I took a lot of different ideas from parallel universe shows and stories that you know, because there's a lot out there, and so you kind of mix, you know, you kind of slowly get all that in your mind and then spill it out into your universe. And so this one, what I did was just tried to make, I wanted everyone to be in somewhat the same. So every person that's in our is in the current universe is in the parallel one, but they look a little different and they act a little different. They might be a nice flight person here, and over there they're arrogant, mean, you know, that type of personality. So it kind of just the same but yet different. So that's kind of just kind of where I got the ideas and put it together.
Very nice. Sarah Ann, do you want to talk about your world building?
Sure. I agree with Bryan a lot. I love the start of building a new world where you get to imagine it and create it. In mine, there's fairies on the island that guide the orphans through hearing the messages, and there's a tree called a starfruit tree. They actually take a bite of the fruit, but once you create the world, yes, then you have to keep track of what the world is and all the details. It's almost a separate note-taking process that you have to keep referring back to, because like mine goes between the fantasy, the island world, and then her real world. So I have to make sure. So the creation is fun. Just the imagining is probably the best part.
So do you all keep series Bibles where you keep track of all the details so you don't write yourself into a corner later, or?
I use a notebook or notes in Scrivener as I go along. I've drawn pictures. Yeah, and you have to. I have to keep a separate like outline or a timeline too, just so I know, like, I don't want to jump from January to June and then back to March. So.
Exactly. I do the exact same thing, is keep notes. Mine are usually handwritten, and the same thing as Sarah, a timeline to keep track of where you're at and as you're writing late. So you don't have to, if you don't do that, then you got to constantly be going back through your manuscript, figuring out what you said back then to do it now. So, right, they try to keep track as they go along.
Yeah, for me, I've got a pretty good memory, so I kind of rely on that more than a Bible, and I've just got the one book so far. So if I can extend this into a series, which is my plan, then I'll probably have to get a little more serious about keeping track of things, because I know kids will notice if I change stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, they always do. So that leads me to the question, you know, we're talking about the kind of behind the scenes writing for books. What's your writing process like? Are you guys plotters, pantsers, somewhere in between?
So I'm kind of I guess, in between. I like to plot it out to the point where, well, typically I have like when I start writing, I have like a specific scene in mind that's kind of the core of the story, and that's where I start from, that kind of initial scene. And then from there, I typically do like chapter titles as the real basic outline that tell me kind of where I want to go chapter to chapter. But then I fill in, I guess I kind of pants it from there to kind of for each chapter. But I need this chapter titles to keep me from going way off track into something that I had not planned at all. So I guess, yeah, combination of the two for me.
I'm the same. I go back and forth. Usually, again, I get an idea and start writing it, and then I have to take some time, like, okay, where do I want to go as a general big outline, but maybe not even to the end, like the next couple steps, and then fill those in, because as you write, sometimes a new character appears or something you write that you weren't expecting. And so then you take that line a little bit farther, because I like to see a little bit ahead of where I'm kind of trying to plan to go, or what the highlight events are. So let's go back. You plan, then you write, and then you plan, and then you write.
I understand that. I get kind of terrified looking at the blank page and not knowing where I'm going next. How about you, Bryan? Are you planning, or are you just sort of?
I guess I could almost just repeat what both Sam and Sarah said. It was exactly that. I plan quite a bit. I'll have quite a decently detailed outline, but it's still just an outline, and I'll usually start at the beginning and start writing, but then it scene by scene develops as I'm writing it. So yeah, it's just kind of a skeletal outline, but then later it can change, because like Sarah said, I'll introduce a new character and think of something else, and then which changes the story later on as I thought about it. So yeah, same type of combination.
It's very kind of interesting to see what other people's processes are like. I know sometimes on panels it can be a very polarizing topic. So it's interesting to see that everybody agrees that we need a little bit of structure, but also not to lose the serendipity of exploring the story, which is really cool.
Well, when you have that shiny new idea, I mean, everybody kind of gets that. You want to just chase that and keep writing, just kind of free writing, I think, as long as that energy of that new idea kind of keeps moving. You know, I think that's kind of what we're all saying, is we just kind of go after that and then add structure to that as we kind of slow down. And yeah,
exactly. Yep, that's well said.
Yeah, I understand that. You know, when you've got the momentum for a new project, you definitely want to go with it. So that makes me wonder, how long does it take you guys to write a book? I know that kind of varies with type of project and, you know, with other things that we have going on in our lives, but what works for you?
Mine's a very long process. Probably, I mean, I do it, you know, late at night, is, you know, after the work day and after, you know, done with everything at home, and then I'll sit down and write. So the amount of time while I'm writing, you know, isn't necessarily that long, but it'll spread out. I mean, when my very first book, when the kids were little and it was really, you know, a lot of time. It took me like 3 years to get all the way done, but it'll still take me you know, close to a year to write a book now, just because of the that's writing it, going back, editing it, and so forth, to get it to the point of a manuscript that I'd submit, just because of the lack of time to actually write.
Yeah, I totally feel that with the kids on tow. It's kind of, you're writing, I call it not a pantser, but a parentser. So you're writing it after the kids get in bed. You're like writing is like mad, as long as you can stay awake, right? So you can get in all the hours. But yeah, I mean, I think this book took me 4 years to write, all told. So it's just those hour, you know, a night where you've got time to do it. It's hard.
I've done first drafts anywhere from like about a month of doing the NaNoWriMo month. I've done one of my books that way, but usually for a rough draft, 3 to 6 months, because I'm in my second year of being a homeschool mom to 4 kids. So I try to write most days, but sometimes it's 10 minutes. So sometimes it's just 200 to 300 words added, but some days I get away and I can add, you know, 2,000 to 3,000 words. So just keep at it.
That's impressive. Homeschool and writing.
Thank you.
Yeah. In terms of writing, I think I try to average about 500 words a day, and that seems to be a good speed for me, to not be going too fast, that I get ahead of my ideas, but not like taking forever to write it too. So that's kind of my milestone.
That's my daily goal, but I don't always hit it. So I try not to beat myself up. If it's like a 200 word day because I got to run a kid to track practice, then totally. I'll take the 200 words.
So Sarah Ann, you mentioned National Novel Writing Month. I've done that a few times and it's always a blast. Can you talk a little bit more, maybe, about what your experiences were with it? And Sam and Bryan, if you have done it, I'd love to hear what your thoughts were.
I've done it a couple different ways depending on what project I'm working on. Usually I've had an idea or had like a bit of a start to a book first. I haven't done like a complete from scratch. But my first book that was published, The Ring, the majority of that was completed in the month of November. And that was hard. It was that's a lot of time commitment to try to get almost 1,700 words every day. And there was a couple days, like Thanksgiving happens in there, so you might not write and you're trying to like make up your words on other days. But I've also done where I've tried just to do 500 words a day for that month or 1,000 words a day for that month. So it's just kind of a useful tool to progress on whatever you're working on for that month, because you can't adjust your goal in that program.
Yeah, I'm trying to do Camp NaNoWriMo right now, and I'm in the middle of edits for another project, so my word count has been pathetically low.
You're trying. It's a great thing.
And I've never tried. Yeah, I've never tried that. I don't think. Yeah, just to be able to to commit to that many, getting that much done, in a specific period of time. I've never given it a try, but I guess once you do it and commit to it, you just force yourself to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. I've gone into it with gusto the first week, and then they kind of peter out because you realize November is a lot busier than you realize once you get to Thanksgiving, like you said, Sarah, and it's a lot. So my son, who is 13, actually did it though. He finished his first novel. I was like, whoa. So he beat me.
Awesome.
It's great.
That's very cool.
Maybe he'll be at one of these panels in 20 years or so. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. One tip is like to start out over. Go 2,000 words a day or so as you start out that first week, and then you're ahead of the game for those days that I can't get all the words today. So.
Maybe I'll try it this year, see if I can do it.
I think it's really kind of a kick in the pants because it got me out of my head and kind of shut up the dreaded inner editor and just kind of focused on flow and got me out of some writer's block. And that brings me to my next question. Do you all experience writer's block? And if you do, how do you solve it?
I don't think I really do. At the speed, like I said, the 500 word a day, I feel like my ideas can keep up with my writing. But yeah, if I'm stuck on a scene or something, I'll sometimes skip it. But it's very hard for me to write non-linearly. Like I want to kind of write everything in order because that's just the way my brain works. But if I'm stuck on a scene, I'll like go for a walk or something like that. Like I guess Stephen King does the same thing. He just takes these long walks to let stuff process.
Yeah. So it gets stuck too. It's usually part of the problem sometimes is just late at night when we're talking about. So I just go to bed and wake up the next day with a fresh outlook on it. But it's the same thing. Usually, if I kind of it's part of that where we talked about where you have your kind of your outline, you've got a lot of your scenes done, but you need something here, but you can't think of how you're going to do it. And you just kind of try to think about it. A lot of times for me, it's when you're doing something else. I'll be like driving down the road, I'll just start thinking, it'll finally come to me, and the ideas will roll, and I'll actually call my voicemail and tell myself what I'm thinking about. So by the time I get home, I have remember everything that I was thinking through. Okay, kind of all of a sudden it'll come and just kind of flow through, and so handle it that way.
Yeah. If I get kind of stuck, I realize it's usually because I haven't taken some time to decompress. Just the busyness will kind of interrupt the writing flow. So sometimes I just give myself a day off because I realize I just need time to think about where the story's going. Or I have a few other outlets. I have a blog, so I do book reviews or do some blogging for other people, or I have a couple like memoir-ish things that probably will never get published, but I can work on just writing something else for a little bit. That's, writing nonfiction memoir is completely different than the fiction. So it kind of just jumps me out of whatever funk I'm in. So, but it just helps to have other things to write. So I don't feel like I'm completely missing a day, but sometimes you just need a day off to think and see where the idea is going to go.
Yeah. Do you guys do this where you get stuck on this is one area where I do get stuck on, I need a name for a character and I just can't think of, so you spend all day looking for the baby list names and stuff like that, trying to name a character. Just silly stuff. I go
to behindthename.com where you can search for name by meaning. So if I've got a character that flies, I look for any name that has anything to do with the sky or whatever, and it is a great research rabbit hole to fall down.
Oh, that's cool. I'll check that out.
So that's behindthename.com in case you ever.
I'll have to try that too, because I'm like Sam, I look at the baby name list. Yeah. Or if I need it a certain nationality, right? The same thing, baby names and Spanish or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you can do that on Behind the Name. You can search by region, and you can search mythological names and historical names, and you can even search surnames if you want. But yeah, it's a fun tool. And sometimes I follow down these rabbit holes, and I have a list of names, and I'm like, I just need to pick one for this hero and go on, and I can change it later.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because
And then I have my husband's old yearbooks up here on the shelf, and I'll just pick one out. Like then whatever name I find first that starts with that letter. That's just the for now.
Name roulette. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess phone books are no longer a thing, so you can't, open the phone book at random. And
Right.
Yeah.
so that kind of leads me to the question about what kind of research do you do for your books? I know, Sam, you talked about, medieval studies and Beowulf and basing your book on that. How much additional research did that take to add to what you already knew?
Well, most of the research I did was historical on like Vikings because I wanted to make it pretty realistic. So there's one scene where there's this battle simulator that they go into where they actually get to live through a real Viking invasion of an English village from like 1,000 years ago. So I wanted to make everything to be really, legit and real there. So I did a lot of research there, just on what Viking life was like and what the raids were really like and things like that. So that was the bulk of my. So this is kind of after I've written kind of stuff, I go back and layer in the reality and the like they're fighting with most of the villagers didn't have like weapons, so they're using like wagon wheels and pots and stuff like that because they just didn't have like swords available because they were expensive back then. So people didn't have that. So I wanted to get all that stuff right. So that was the bulk of my research, was on kind of like historical Viking, I guess, history.
So there's research on real historical pots and pans that were used in battle, huh?
Yeah, actually, right. They've found that battles sites in England, they found like stuff like that, all these implements like pitchforks, just all kinds of stuff that people would use, versus these Vikings who were invading, who had all these like great weapons and some of the best steel and some of the best ships of the time, that they just were kind of just overwhelmed the people that they battled against because they just were superior weaponry at the time.
Very cool. Sarah Ann, Bryan, talk to me about your research process. What kinds of things do you like rabbit holes do you like to fall down?
So for me, it's kind of just depends on the book or the story. So like for A Measure of Serenity, there wasn't a lot of like really any historical type research or reality, but it's things that I didn't know. Like I gave Serenity, the protagonist, she's good at fencing. I wanted to kind of like a classic type sport, but give her something that she could, a little bit of a weapon that she'd have. And so I knew nothing about fencing. So I wanted to use the proper terminologies and so forth. So I'd research that. In my first book, The Brighter the Stars, that took place in outer space. And I wanted to layer in made up planets, but within the real planets and real galaxies and so forth. So I had to do a lot of research. I did a lot of research on kind of like Sam was saying, to get things right. I did that as far as astronomy and so forth.
For this book, for 1 year, she has a science fair, and I had her do an aquaponics tank with fish and growing vegetables, which I didn't know anything about. So that was interesting to research and do. And then her grandmother develops MS. So I had to do some research on like realistic symptoms and how that was dealt with. So not a lot of super detailed research, but I want to get the details right on the things that I didn't know about.
Very cool. I know that, I don't know, I tend to fall down many deep rabbit holes and don't emerge for many hours later. And I think I could have gotten so many words down during this time, but failed to do it.
You have to decide if you're just trying to distract yourself from writing or if you're legitimately actually doing research.
Exactly. No, I do the exact same thing. Right.
How much do I really need to research sea creatures that are at the bottom of the Marianas Trench? I need to, learn a little bit more about those two worms.
There's plenty of videos you can see on YouTube to distract yourself with those, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. YouTube is great for this.
And mine, they had there's a Viking game called Canadalker that I was trying to find, because there's no descriptions of it really in the Norse myths and stuff. And so I went on this long YouTube things where there are actually people who have tried to recreate the game today, and they've got these leagues where they try to play Knataliker. So I was like watching all these videos, trying to get an idea of what this game is, so I can include on a book. So similar to Bryan and Sarah, just kind of these real specific stuff, I guess, that you just didn't know about, but it's fun. But you've also got to, limit your time.
That was a real game that the Vikings played. That was an actual real.
Right. Yeah. And usually somebody would end up dying at the end or something like that.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was a really rough game.
Yeah.
So is that the weirdest thing that you found in all of your research, or?
The weirdest thing. Let's see. I think if you look at the North Mist, there's just tons of weird stuff. Like there's so Loki at the end of days is supposed to ride in on this ship made of toenails. So just bizarre stuff if you read through the North Mist. So there's a bunch of stuff like that. So that might be in a future book. I'll have a ship made of toenails. Although Rick Riordan did that already, so I guess I can't copy that.
Whose toenails?
Yeah.
Every time you clip your toenails, apparently the shavings, according to the North Mist, they go and Loki collects them all and builds a ship out of them.
He's a busy dude.
Yeah.
Wow. Now I kind of want to know about the buoyancy of toenails, and
Yeah,
it's really
right.
possible.
Just my next writing rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Bryan, Sarah Ann, do you ever find something really weird in your research that you wish you could have included or did include?
I can't think that I have, and if I have, it pales in comparison to that. Yeah.
I can't think of anything. My first book was a military story, but I grew up in that. I did have to do a little research on a couple bases I hadn't been to, but I knew most of that world from growing up in it. But nothing quite as fun as Norse games where people die at the end.
But I think Bryan's research was probably watching X-Files, and that's fun to just got all that parallel universe stuff.
Very cool. So what do you all like most about writing, and what do you like the least? I know for myself, I like the having written, but sometimes the process is painful. Is there anything specific about that process that you all love or loathe?
I love creating the story. I love getting ideas. I love seeing where it takes me. I love being surprised while I write. Because I think people think like you sit down and write and you know exactly A to Z how the book is going to go. And I've been surprised so many times that like a conversation is happening and I'm like, oh, well, they just said that. So then they reply this and, oh, we're here now. Like, and I didn't see that coming, or a whole new character like we've mentioned before. It's hard how long it takes to write a book. It's probably what I like the least, along with having to then go back and edit. You kind of wish like you could just write the whole story and like, okay, I'm done. That story is complete. It's ready to go. Yeah.
I feel you on that one. Sometimes I really wish I could just push fast forward and, once I have the idea, move a little bit more quickly to the finished thing, because I want to know what happens next, and I'm not going to know unless I write.
And so, sometimes I'm the opposite. I'll try to do too much and get too much of the detail and everything as I'm going through the first time, to have more of a complete book or manuscript at the end. But you get bogged down when you're doing that instead of, just letting yourself flow. So I have to try to make myself skip stuff and just get stuff on paper with the idea that, yeah, I'll come back and, edit it. And I know Sam talked about layering in, and Sarah did too. So I actually have to like make myself do that. And then when I do, it makes the writing process, at least the first draft, a lot smoother.
That totally makes sense. Getting the skeleton down first and then adding the flesh on top of it. Yeah.
And I don't know what you guys do with beta readers, but I think the tough part for me still is getting the feedback from like when you send it to people, like you're like, I want to hear back from them, but I don't want to hear back from them. It's the same thing. So I'm still trying to develop the thick skin, right? Because you don't want to take it as a personal affront. It's not you they're rejecting, right? If they don't like your story or some part of it. So that's still the toughest part for me, I think, is getting the critique partners and beta reader feedback. So I usually let my son and my wife read my stuff first, and they're usually pretty nice, maybe too nice. But then that gives me a kind of a little cushion, and then I go out to the, other authors and then get their feedback. But it's hard to get feedback.
So how is it with incorporating feedback into work? I know that it's kind of difficult for everyone because, I don't know, you finish creating this thing and you feel that it's pretty and shiny and it's just about ready to go. It just needs a little tweaking. And then sometimes you send it off to a crit partner or an editor and they go. So how do you all manage feedback in your writing?
Yeah, I get the most because I'm like Sam, kind of my initial readers are more, I think, sometimes too friendly, so I don't get a lot of feedback. I get the most from my publisher when they edit it. And that first round of edits, it's like, wow, why did you even accept this if you want me to do all this? But but it always ends up, I mean, when I read through it, it's like, wow, yeah, why didn't I think of that or do that the first time? And at the end of the day, it just, I've learned it comes back so much more polished if you do what they say, and they don't go through and say change this to this. It's like, hey, why don't you add something about this? Or so you still have to come up with it and create it, but when you do, it really fills in that spot because you've read your story so much, there's things that you don't put in there because you know what it is, but someone that reads it for the first time sees a little gap there. So it's you learn that it ends up being very helpful once you get over that initial shock.
Yeah, whenever I get an editorial letter, I'm like, okay, I open it right away. And then I'm like, okay, this isn't nearly as bad as I thought, because I immediately think that, okay, I've turned this thing in and it is garbage. Yeah. And sometimes I'm really pleasantly surprised that it is not as foul smelling as I thought it was.
Yeah.
So Ryan, how do you incorporate feedback?
It's not easy. I'll admit I don't enjoy that process at all, but it is nice when people like it. When my husband reads it and comes up with, he's like, what do you think about this? I'm like, you're not the writer. But I'm getting better as time goes on, and it is I'm working on taking feedback better. But yeah, it is good. You have to put it out there and you have to see what people like and don't like and really work at editing. I'm great at first drafts, and then I need to go back and edit myself very well before I show it to family. But I'm lucky I have one daughter that will catch every grammatical typo that I make. I know. So she's often my very first. I'm like, I'll get rid of all the typos first.
Is she able to be honest with you about whether she likes it or not too, or?
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. Perfect.
That's great. I feel like sometimes, I send my manuscripts to my husband and he always has, nice things to say, but I keep telling him, you could be harsh. I would rather hear this from you than hear it from a reader later on down the line. And sometimes I can nudge him into.
That's good.
Yeah. So that kind of makes me also think of, rejection. Rejection is kind of a constant companion in the writing world, and it's kind of hard to take and hard to deal with. And I think I've gotten better about it over time. I've kind of learned to kind of accept it and move on, but it still stings a bit. How do you all frame it in your mind, and how do you deal with it? Is it something that you're still going through, or is it something that you feel is behind you or ahead of you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I decided to just not read Goodreads reviews anymore because I just can't. It's not a good mental thing for me to do. And people can be pretty mean kind of sometimes. I think with middle grade, the cool thing is though that they're not so much. And maybe you guys have had different experiences with YA, because I feel like YA reviewers are even kind of harder on books. But at least from that perspective of rejection from readers, I think that I've had a lot of positive feedback, but it's always the kind of the one or two bad comments that stick with you rather than like the 70 good comments. So it's hard to kind of get comfortable with that, I guess.
I agree. No, go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
I agree 100%. And that's it. I don't think it ever goes away, because you start, you get rejected if you're trying to get an agent or a publisher, or you finally get it published, and then you get rejected by reviewers when you're trying to get it reviewed. Then you get it reviewed and published, and then you get the critics on wherever, Goodreads, Amazon, and like Sam said, there's the few bad ones stick with you. But the one thing I started to do was, when I get a bad review, I go look up some of my favorite authors that are really popular, and whether it's Stephen King or whatever, and you go start looking on Goodreads through reviews of their books, and there'll be someone will give just as bad a review to them. So I think, well, if Stephen King can get a bad review, then I can too. So just a little aside there.
I do the same thing. That's awesome to hear other people do that too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm an avid reader as well. And so I realize, like, there are books that I like that other people don't like, and they're vice versa. So, one of my bad reviews in my first book, which is a clean romance, came from someone who I know reads a lot of steamy romance. So it's just not probably the best fit for what she enjoys. So try not to, there's a book for everyone and everyone for a book. But yeah, I'm in the process with my fourth book to try to get an agent. And it's interesting. This past week, I got one no, like within 12 hours of submission. And then another no was like sent in 4 or 5 months ago. That was actually like a thoughtful, like, good, but just not for me. And the other one that was quick was very like, you could tell it's just like a quick no like thing. And you're like, okay, well, I just have to keep going. But, some people take more thought and look into it, and some people don't. But I did publish my first 3 through an independent publisher. So I'm trying to hopefully follow the traditional route from here on. But there's a lot more. I have a lot more books in me. So you got to start somewhere.
The rejections I hate the most are the ones that were so close, that this was a hard decision, but
yeah.
Or we recently acquired something that was, similar to this, and the ones where you really know that there was nothing that you could do, and it just is what it is. So
I've heard the rejections are just taking like a super long time now because everybody's behind because of COVID. So you're just not hearing anything. I don't have anything like really on submission right now. So, but other author friends are telling me that it's just taking a really long time. So you've got that, whether you're actually going to hear it all versus getting a rejection.
That's a good point. I didn't think of that. Yeah, because I don't have anything out right now either, and that would be the case right now. Because it already took, for a publisher, it already took even before COVID, it took a while till you heard anything, and that would be worse.
Yeah, the one I just got that was several months ago. I'm like, I'd already kind of written, after a couple months go by, you're like, oh, probably don't even hear anything, and it was just out of the blue. I'm like, oh, it was a thoughtful reply. That was nice.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah, I accumulated a lot of rejections last year, but I was glad that they actually read it.
Right.
I guess. I kind of am just trying to look at the silver lining, and I feel like, all right, if I kept track of numbers or something, I'd probably be totally crushed and never write another word. But I just try to view it, rejection is just kind of part of the process. It's just something to get through, to get to the person who's going to say yes for this project at this time. And, the more I get rejected, the closer I am. But man, sometimes it's rough.
Yeah.
Order pizza.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and everybody says it all the time, but it's just such a subjective industry that you've got, like Sarah Ann was saying, is just kind of find the right person at the right time who's right in that mood looking for that particular book. It's tough.
Yeah.
So you can't take it personally.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It is hard not to take this personally, because you put forth a product that you've created and that you love, and you put so much time and years sometimes into, and
at the same time, I say don't take it personally. It is like you said, it's you on the page basically, so it's hard not to take it personally. but as a writer, you have to just kind of figure out how to do that.
Yeah, yeah. It is a kind of an important skill. The tough skinness, is that a word? Tough skin is a quality. I think that it's kind of important to develop over time, and
Absolutely.
it's I think that we all kind of go into it thinking that, hey, I'm going to have somebody's going to accept my first book, and my debut novel is going to make it to the top of the New York Times bestseller list, and I'm always jazzed when I see that happen, and it's like a fairy tale. It is really, really cool to see it occur, when it does. It kind of gives everybody a hope who's working in the trenches at the moment. But
Definitely.
yeah, definitely.
Can I ask a question real quick? I'm just curious with you guys, Sarah Ann and Brian, was it your first book that you published, or did you have multiple that are in a drawer now that will never see the light of day before that?
Mine was kind of the first one. It was I said it was I sent it out and rejected and finally put it away, and then brought it out later and sent it. Well, it's kind of a little bit of a long story, but ended up getting a publisher to then take it, but they wanted to redo a bunch of it. So this was like a few years later, I kind of rewrote it, and they accepted it, and then went on from there. So the first book, but kind of the first book and a half of a book, so to speak. Yeah.
The first book I published was the first book I ever started, but it was like 10 years ago. We moved, and then I lost the file on the computer.
No.
So I actually wrote, the second book I published is the first full book I wrote, but I learned so much doing that, and I probably rewrote it 5 or 6 times. Just learned a ton writing that book. But then I did a NaNoWriMo month and wrote The Ring, and that's the first one I ended up publishing because I had learned all that from the first book.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got the first book polished up, and that's now the second book. So the first two kind of flipped. But I had to learn to write consistently, have a timeline, take notes. I kind of wrote it where it went back and forth, and then I wrote it where it went all in order, and then different points of view. So a lot to learn.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly, Sarah, what happened with me is after you learn so much, and then I rewrote it, and it worked. So yeah, that first one. So Sam, the one you have right now is your first book, you say, your debut? So.
Well, it's my first published, but I do have a few that I wrote before. I actually started writing picture books first.
Okay.
And didn't publish any of those. I switched over to middle grade, kind of following my kids up in age. Because I was reading a lot of picture books and saying, oh, I think I can do this, and wrote a bunch and didn't publish any. And then I started reading Rick Riordan with my kids, and then tried that, and actually that worked. So this is probably, I don't know, maybe my 6th or 7th book, maybe something like that.
So we're all kind of saying that same thing. It's kind of the first one or so. It's you learn so much more, and your books get better as you go. I agree.
Yeah, I have some picture books too from when my kids were little that I picked that never got published. So I've done that too.
It's like, this looks so easy. I can do this, right?
More drafts in the work, and then ideas. Yeah.
Yep.
They say that's some of the hardest to get published are children's books.
Yeah, that's right. There's not as many, I think, published as there are like adult books and middle grade, right?
Yeah.
What about you, Laura? Did you have a first book that is never going to see the light of day? Or?
It's a 175,000 word epic fantasy that is irredeemable.
Oh boy.
It's irredeemable. I mean, I kind of keep
legend.
it. Yeah, it's not great, but I keep it in my back pocket in case I ever need to get out of a contract where they say, we get right of first refusal on your next work. And if this gets me out.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, and I don't think anybody has ever read past the first 2 chapters of it, but it's useful to have just in case. I don't think it's ever going to go anywhere, but
Mhm. Wow.
it lives in a giant shoebox, and I loved it, and it took me longer to write that than any other book. And maybe sometime I'll crib some details from it and use it as the root for something else. But yeah, I'm glad nobody saw that one.
I love that. That's cool.
We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about your current book and whether you've got any advice for aspiring writers and what's next for you. I know that you guys have talked about that your books are parts of series. Just want to find out what you'd like to share that you've learned so far with folks who are at the beginning, and what's next for you.
Who wants to go first? Sarah Ann, do you want to take that?
Hey, rock,
Okay.
paper, scissors. We need to do this.
For advice, I would say writing consistently is the biggest piece of advice I would give a new writer. To just you stick with your story more, and again, even if it's 10 minutes a day, if it's most days of the week, your story will flow. You'll be a better writer if you just write consistently. I'm currently working on, I think it'd be my 7th novel, but I go more for ideas. So I've got a adult clean military romance, I've got a young adult dystopian, and I've got a young adult realistic fantasy. What I'm currently working on is a young adult that deals with virtual reality. I thought that would be an interesting thing to dive into because it seems like it's the up and coming thing, and what could be positive, but what could be negative with that. So that's kind of what I'm exploring right now. But what I'm hoping to publish next would be a Christmas story set in the town I live in. So I thought I did a quick draft of that at the beginning of this year, and I thought that was super fun. It's kind of short, but it's got a lot of local places, and just, I love reading Christmas books. In December, that's pretty much the only thing I read is like little short holiday novels. It just kind of helps put me in the mood for the holidays.
Oh, very cool. And it's fun when you get to go to places that and kind of explore them for books. I think that there was a town on Lake Erie, Lakeside, Ohio, that I used as a setting for one of my stories once upon a time. And it's fun to kind of lay your story over that landscape and see how your story might interact with things that are real. So
Kind of easier to see sometimes when you know the places in real life.
Very cool.
For me, I guess on the advice side, kind of a couple of things that we've already talked about, just like Sarah said, is to kind of you just have to start just writing and keep writing, just to be consistent with it, even on bad days. And then as we talked about, being able to be prepared for criticism and not taking it personally. But the other thing is kind of the business side of it. If your goal is just to write a book, just to write a book, that's fine. If you want to write it and get it published, that's the next step. But if you write it and get it published and then actually get it noticed and actually sell some copies, not to make money, but just to get it out there, is the business side. And start building your social media accounts and followings, and just, to me, that's the hardest. As hard as it is to work through and write a book and edit it and get it published, the real challenge is then getting it out into the public and getting it noticed through the marketing, because like we said, there's just so many books out there. So just kind of be prepared for that. What's next? So the sequel to The Brighter the Stars, my first book, the sequel to that, The Darker the Skies, will be out in November. So my publisher, Camcat Publishing, they have it right now. We're actually down to the final round of edits with them, and so that's written. It'll be out, and I have like we talked. I don't have an outline or anything, but I have the idea or plan for the third and final book in that series, and then also a sequel, which would be the final book my current one, A Measure of Serenity. But in the meantime, I actually had an idea and started to write an adult murder mystery. So that's what I'm actually working on right now, kind of jumping away from all the others. So whether that's good or bad, that's where I'm at.
It's fun to hop genres though, especially if you can take some of your audience. I know that a lot of folks pick up new pen names, and I've done that in the past when changing genres. But I think a lot of people, will follow you over from one to another, and it's kind of cool to dabble in something new.
Yeah, well, and that's what, and I know, Sarah, you said you jump around, and that's what I've been trying to think about is how, because that's not going to necessarily sell to the same market and the same following I have for the first two books, is how to shift that, whether to do it through a pen name and so forth. So kind of still in that thought process.
Are you going to pick up new pen names, Sarah, or?
No, I have I'm just gonna stick with my name.
Awesome.
I've written so many different newspaper articles and magazines and blogs. I figured everything will just go under the same name.
Gotcha.
It's hard to juggle more than one website and more than one social media identity and everything.
That's the downside.
Hard.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. Exactly.
Sam, what advice do you have, and what's next for you?
Yeah, so my advice actually was, really related to what Sarah Ann and Bryan said about just trying different genres and different styles, things like that, especially as you're getting started, trying to find, what is your best fit. Because that's kind of what I did. I tried picture books, like I mentioned, and some chapter books, middle grade, all kind of in the kids area, but still just different styles to see what I was best at, I guess. But this current book, what I wrote when I was writing it, I was kind of stuck on just trying to find the right voice, and I just switched to first person, and that just kind of opened the floodgates for me. All of a sudden, it just felt like more like free flowing. The ideas were coming, and I just felt like the voice was like I finally had found it. And so just trying different things like that can really open up, I think, the writing process for you. So I definitely recommend trying different things and seeing what's a good fit for you to start. And then, like you guys said, just continuing that in your career, just to keep stuff fresh and feel like you're not stuck in a lane that you don't want to be in all the time. So hopefully I'll be able to do that too, because I like fantasy, but I also like to write contemporary and historical and stuff like that too. So maybe a novel in verse at some point. I don't know. But so as far as what I'm working on next, though, I have written the second book in this series. And I'm hoping for the green light on that pretty soon. And then I'm also working on a historical dragons in World War II middle grade as well. So we'll see if that one goes anywhere. But sticking with middle grade for now, because I'm just having fun, and you can put, like I said, a lot of fun aspects in middle grade, like silly stuff that makes the writing fun for me. So.
That's the important thing, to have fun. Before we close, I'd like to make sure that folks know where to find you on the internet. If you've got any Twitter handles, your websites that you want to share, now would be the time.
So I have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, but if you go to our website, it's all connected there, which is www.bryankprosek.com.
Okay.
And same for me. I think the easiest way to find all my stuff is on samsubity.com, just my name all smashed together.
Yeah, I have sarahanncarter.com. Of course, that's Sarah with an H and with an E, carter.com. Most of my handles are by Sarah Ann Carter. Twitter is by Sarah A. Carter. So I kind of grabbed that handle.
Well, great. Thanks again to our panelists, Sarah Ann Carter, Bryan Prosek, and Sam Subity. A reminder that you can get copies of the books by each one of our authors from the Book Loft of German Village at bookloft.com. Thanks again to our festival sponsors and partners, and thank you for joining us. Please check out the Ohioana website for all this year's festival programs.